Hi, friends. This is John. Welcome back to the Regenerative Agriculture Podcast. You won't believe the fun conversation we're going to have today. I've been looking forward to this discussion. I'm joined by uh, a farming couple, Michael Frey and Nicole Dooling from Mariah Vineyards, who have a really fascinating story of the journey that they have been on with their vineyard in California. Michael and Nicole, welcome to the show. Thanks for all the work that you're doing. Can you tell us a little bit about your your personal journey, your story, both the two of you as individuals, what brought you back to the farm, and what has been happening with your enterprise?
First of all, thank you very much for having us. And I think,
Yeah, thanks for having us on. I mean, I listen to your podcast all the time, so it's amazing to be on the other side of it, I guess. Long story long, huh? No, I'll try to make it short, but I guess we should start with Mariah Vineyards is a high elevation dry farm vineyard in the Mendocino Ridge AVA. It is as far as I know, still only non-contiguous AVA in America. It consists of the first coastal ridgeline in Mendocino County.
When you say high elevation and dry land, what does that translate to in terms of moisture, rainfall? What does that look like in terms of a farming environment?
So our vineyard, well, the AVA is anything above 1,200 feet, so it's kind of this peak mountaintop peaks along this ridgeline. Our vineyard sits at about approximately 2,400 feet, which is quite high for a vineyard in California. And our well, whatever is normal anymore is, I don't know, but we get,
Normal is becoming pretty changeable, isn't it?
yes. So climate variability is definitely an issue. So I mean, what the level of rainfall we got when I grew up there versus what we get now is obviously different. But we get on average anywhere from, in a dry year, 50, 60 inches of rain to well over 100, 120 some is, I think, one of the biggest years we ever had. So we get some substantial rainfall. Obviously, it's concentrated in the winter months or fall and winter and spring months. We get snow often, depending on the weather systems. So and then dry farm. We are, for well over 20 years, the whole vineyard has been dry farmed, meaning that we do not irrigate. So we rely on the rain that we receive and the groundwater reserves for our growing season.
When farmers in Nebraska and Kansas will hear you refer to dry farming as 50 to 60 inches of rainfall a year, they might laugh a little bit about that. But
yeah,
True,
exactly.
true.
Yeah.
But you know what? I totally get that. But the point is that there is no we are in our context, or our eco region is allows us to do so. So why wouldn't we, kind of thing? We also are on this mountaintop off the grid. I mean, I grew up, we had a generator when I was a kid, and it's been fully on solar for, well, a long time now. But there's no tap into the city water system. There's no, excess electricity. I mean, I guess there is with solar now, but we don't have we don't have really another possibility. I mean, we do have a pond, but in dry years, to really think about irrigating a 30-acre vineyard with one little pond is,
you have the benefit of growing a crop that has a very deep root system and that can access water down deep, assuming that it is available. If you're farming at such a high elevation, what do your soil types look like? Do your soils have the ability to infiltrate and hold water down deep? What does that look like?
It was uh, it was previously forest, so we have about 12% organic matter.
Wow.
That was a big part to go on the regenerative journey. Actually, is climate resilience. So there was one side was climate resilience, the other side was differentiation in the market. Please excuse my pronunciation. uh, Climate resilience because we have this 100 inches of rain, and it's important for us that we have living roots in the soil. It's important that our soil is like a sponge. It's important for us that we store the water that we get uh, to survive the drought during the summertime.
so that's why we are 100% cover year round.
Yes.
Vine rows and vine alley. Like, well, I guess everybody has a different way, but our entire vineyard is fully covered all year round. We don't have any bare soil. And that's incredibly important for obviously retaining the high levels of rainfall we often get. It's also important to hold that moisture in our soil, as well as keep our soils cool. We don't get valley heat like a lot of other places in California, but we still get some heat. We are um, we had, what was it, 2022? I mean, we had a 5-day stretch of 117-degree weather, and then 2 days later, it rained nearly 5 inches.
Wow.
It was extreme. So, there's a lot of reasons why we definitely a permanent cover everywhere, and throughout our, even through the winter seasons, we go out and we seed ryegrass and put straw on our vineyard roads, the roads that cut through the blocks, because over the growing season, with tractor passes and stuff, it gets, we want to ensure that like even our roads are not, that they're soaking in water, um, and have living roots in them. So
I definitely want to come back and talk more about the cover crops and how you're maintaining those and the species diversity that you have. But let's bookmark that for a moment. I'd love to hear more about your journey to the farm. Michael, you started speaking about some of the motives that you had for pursuing a regenerative approach. What was Nicole grew up there on the vineyard on the mountaintop, as she has been describing it. What brought you to the farm, and what has your pathway been?
When I was 35, I quit my life in Switzerland. I had a pretty amazing job in the management team in a food
you didn't
company.
quit your life, you started.
Yes, I started. But there was, but I always had a big drive to see the world. I watched documentaries about the beauty of the world, and I really, really wanted to see that with my own eyes. So I started the world trip actually for 1.5 years, traveled once around the globe, and met my future wife in Peru, Nicole. and,
Not the other one, huh?
and that was the beginning of a journey where I came back to San Francisco. We visited the vineyard. We were up there, and I was stunned by the remote location. It's on this ridge top. It's surrounded by pristine forests. It's on our own spring. It's no light pollution. It's on solar. It's the problems that you face during harvest are bears, and mountain lions and all the stuff. So I for me it was just spectacular, this place up on this ridge top. So there was a big spark about the beauty of the place on one side, and then the second thing was a close family friend, Paul Dolan, sparked us with regenerative agriculture. We had lunch with him, and he started speaking about the capabilities of bringing back biodiversity, the capabilities of sequestering carbon, the capabilities of just to create a system that is teeming with the environment, and not extracting the environment. And for Nicole and I, that was just mind-boggling, and the spark that we have inside of us ever since.
And he sent us to the Regenerative Earth Summit in 2019 in Colorado, in Boulder. And we didn't really know what regenerative really was or what this was, but we trusted in Paul's, and so we just went, and it was this spark that, there was these people, I mean, all different types of farmers. And I mean, some of the heavy hitters of the regenerative movement, like Mad Ag, Elizabeth, like Charles Eisenstein. I mean, there was Will Harris, all these, Savory Institute, all these people were there, and we didn't really know who they were. We were just talking and hanging out and learning about it, and realizing that there's this amazing way in which we can farm better, And we walked away just completely inspired, and came back to the vineyard to my parents, and we were like, we've got it. I mean, not to say that they were farming badly or anything, but we've got to do better. We got to do this. Like, let's let's be better let's be better farmers, and um that started this whole path down the being a pilot vineyard for the Savory Institute's land to market ecological outcome verification. And we are so inspired by regenerative agriculture and the possibilities on which it can create, a more lively ecosystem, as well as, now we go down the path into nutrient density and things like that. But this idea that we can do things better, and we said we'll jump in, we'll support. And that was really what brought me home, was this inspiration around regenerative farming and learning how to be a farmer. It wasn't because, and I mean, I've kept my day job, because we all know farming is not always the most lucrative of a way to sustain yourself. So, and I love nursing. So I've just been balancing between the two and trying to learn as much as I can. So that's really what brought me home.
Nicole, tell us a bit more about your journey before you came back home, and then also what has the relationship been like with your parents, as you are the young people coming in with very new and very different ideas than what they've been exposed to before. What has that been like?
Well, I mean, for me, the vineyard was my home. My dad was a farmer, or my parents were farmers. And I mean, it just was what I grew up with. I didn't think it was really weird or abnormal until I went away to college and realized, like, nobody else like has parents that are farmers. I just kind of did my own thing in life and went my own direction. And I think Michael, between Michael's, you know, coming and walking and seeing the vineyard, and, he looks at it with these eyes of just like, wow, this place is truly unique, truly amazing, truly beautiful. And, and then I'm thinking, wow, geez, they planted 30 acres of vineyard. Like, whoa, like I knew my parents were pioneers on some level, but like, that's his life and his passion. And I respect that. And I think it made me look at it a little bit differently, and not just like, oh, this is my home. This is like, whoa, no, this is something that they've created and has to be maintained, but also preserved, and needs to continue. It can't, a lot of farms get sold out and things like that. So looking at it with Michael was a little bit more, I just looked at it in a different way. And that, I wanted to be part of that. I wanted to help with that. And then realizing my parents could really use some help was also, part of it too. So yeah, we just jumped in head first. And, I balanced my time between my ER shifts and going to the vineyard and helping. And that's just been our back and forth life for what, well over 5 years now.
Mhm.
For me, it's also, it's this ability to to come back and help be part of the next generation, and learn from my parents and the knowledge that they have of that land, and how they've done things. But also, I mean, I'm not I didn't go to school and learn about viticulture or enology or soil health. I mean, I had an aquatic biology degree from, my undergrad, but like I don't have this knowledge base to really. I just have, I don't know, I guess the energy to learn and to take what they've done and what they've learned, and bring that with what we are learning in the regenerative agriculture space, and try to balance that into our context on the vineyard, and make you know some knowledgeable, informed decisions to continue the health and vitality of that vineyard,
Yeah.
which has led us obviously to the work that you guys are doing.
So that was, I come back to your question about generational challenges, but also the positive of the several generations on the table. I think the first step that we did on Mariah Vineyards is setting on an outcome base. It was the first step that we did was try to understand what's going on underneath the ground and above the ground, hand in hand with the Savory Institute and the ecological outcome verification. We looked at organic matter, we looked at the mineral cycle, water cycle, biodiversity, and all that stuff. And then started implementing new cover crops, increased biodiversity. We brought sheep back. You mentioned on your podcast with Charles Eisenstein, regenerative agriculture is all about relationships. And when I heard that, when I listened to the podcast, I can spot on. So we started building relationships back on the vineyard. Ever since, everything that we implement leads to something else. So we increased biodiversity, and then the sheep came, and then we had a mildew outbreak, and we learned, and then we went to sap analysis and nutrients in the wine, and now we are in pruning systems about sap flow. So it's a constant path of exploration and learning, and absolutely stellar. I absolutely
It's
love
an
it.
amazing rabbit hole, this
Yes.
regenerative agriculture space.
Back to the generational things. It's absolutely amazing to have the possibility to learn from somebody that farmed the property for 40 years, that knows 40 different seasons, that tackled a lot of problems. That's the positive side. On the other side, there's a lot of discussions because there's a mindset how a vineyard has to look. It has to be maintained. The grass has to be short. It's the simplification of an ecosystem, right?
It was initially there had to be, dirt in the vine row because I'm dry farming. I don't want the cover crop to compete with my vines. And sorry.
And then on the other side is the simplification of the ecosystem. And then on the other side, Nicole and I came back and say, we want to embrace complexity. Let's just increase biodiversity. We want to have a flourishing, thriving ecosystems with plants and buzzing stuff. And these two worlds are clashing constantly. But I also think that these clashes and these frictions are leading to good change. Just it's in loops. It's in loops that we are making progress, but the trajectory is definitely the right one.
When I hear what your pathways have been and what you've been describing, there's this quote that comes to mind. I forget who it's attributed to, but something along the lines of confusion is the beginning point of learning. Or, in other words, before you can learn anything, you first have to arrive internally at the place of acknowledging that you don't know. And that can be difficult for people who have a lot of experience or who have a lot of education in a certain domain. And so, in that sense, I actually think it's been probably a strength for you and a significant opportunity for you that you didn't have a lot of things. You came in already recognizing that you didn't know. And that is what has made the learning journey so much fun.
I totally agree with that. And it also, in a weird way, like only because I know that with this new method of, kind of pruning around more vine health, sap flow, my my mom made an interesting comment around the fact that it's probably easier for us to understand and learn this approach to pruning than it's been for them because they have these other ways that they learn or that they were taught ingrained in them that for us it's almost easier because we aren't so ingrained in these other methods of farming, not just pruning. So I think you're right. I think it's been a bit of a blessing where, we sit at the dinner table and it's like, I mean, I have this crazy idea. Does it really, what if we try it like this? And my dad's like, either like, no, that won't work because of X, Y, and Z in the past, this and that. And then I'll be like, well, what about this? And we can kind of talk through different things. It's just this constant conversation, which I will admit can be exhausting, but it can also be incredibly rewarding and really amazing to kind of think through and tackle problems together with new ideas, new we are learning about what's happening in the viticulture space and in the regenerative agriculture space, and about these, like what Michael mentioned before, these like, duh, like why didn't we think about pruning for sap flow before? It's these things like that it's exciting to do that together and to bring forward the next generation on the vineyard. So
I think we have a big chance, and my parents-in-law welcomed us up there, and are giving us a lot of opportunities to try and to test and to play. So I don't take that absolutely not for certain. And then on the other side, since we started, I think we can also show some results. We were the first land to market verified vineyard out there. That allowed us to differentiate the fruit. That allowed us to do some optimization on the business side. Uh, we launched wine. So during this process, and all this friction, there's some rewarding results coming out of it. So I think that confirms our path forward.
Yeah, I really appreciate the perspective and the appreciation, kind of the respect for the effort of the previous generation that you bring forward. And I find that there is this very common conversation where I'm hesitant to call them the previous generation, but the older generation that currently owns a lot of land and has a lot of equity in farming operations are often very jaded by the economic realities that they've gotten to experience in agriculture, and they're often very discouraging of young people who want to come into the space, particularly young people who are studying around regenerative agriculture, and they become inspired. They get this spark and they become inspired. They want to try new things and try a different approach and a different pathway. So within your experience and what your pathway has been, what have you discovered any particularly valuable tools for bridging the disconnect between the experience reality of several decades of farming experience as contrasted with a different perspective?
the first thing that comes to mind is I think it was one of your podcasts, like it's a couple years ago now, but it was a podcast I was listening to, and I was in the vineyard fixing some wires, listening to this podcast. And I don't even remember which farmer it was or who it was, but on this podcast, this farmer, somebody said, "Well, somebody must say you've got 40 years of experience, and blah, blah, blah. You must know all this stuff." And he's like, "You know what? My answer is always, I have 40 different experiences." And for me, that is something that like really stuck with me. And I bring it to my dad all the time. And I say, "Dad, like I know that you've gone through this, and I know you have these different things, but like this is going into our 44th year, or his 44th year, and it is a completely different experience than all the rest of the 43 years." And so for me, that's a little bit of like, we need to think of this growing season, or how we approach it, not necessarily with disregard for the past, but with an open mind for how, I mean, our climate is completely, it's different. Things are really different. You can't just apply a recipe every year and expect it, and to not think through things. So for me, that's been a way in which I'm like, but remember, and it works often, but sometimes it doesn't.
I think farming. I think as a farmer, it's a lot about show me. You can talk a lot about benefits of regenerative agriculture or practices, or you name it. But I think it's a lot about show me, out of a farmer perspective. So I think when we all went to educational classes, when we all were on the ground, the second generation and the first generation, and we hear the first thing when we invited people up on the vineyard, and we walked together and spoke and learned. I think that changed a lot. I think just to go up and throw theory around, I think that's not the path forward. My personal opinion.
Agree. Hmm. And that's been we've been very, I think, really, like, we are all four of us are really integrated in this, and we really, it's a team effort. And I really, there's some challenges involved, but mostly it is rewarding. I mean, I get to learn and work with my parents, and which can be challenging, but can also be incredibly amazing. Like, I'm learning so much, or we both are. And I think it's brought new life. I mean, I know it's brought new, they've been up there for a long time, and there's, definitely some arthritis in my, and but like they're doing great, and they are still heavily involved in farming. Like, we are not, this is not, this is a group of us, that is trying to ensure that we keep that vineyard thriving and healthy to withstand whatever gets thrown our way.
While keeping our private relationship flourishing. It's all about flourishing.
Relationship,
It's all about
relationship, to, like, I have a deep relationship with that land. That is my home. More than anything, that is my home. I don't want it. I don't want to lose it. But I have a new respect for the relationship my parents have with that land, and how valuable that relationship is. No matter how, the challenges involved in the generational fluctuations and mindsets and things, it's all worth it in the end. If I, just was like, all right, just figure it out yourself, like, I would be sad to see if something, if they couldn't support it or had to sell it or something like that. So I have a vested interest in ensuring the dream that they've created can follow through into generations to come.
And I'm confident that when you come from that place within and you show up in that way, that is felt and appreciated, and that is considered as well. So you've now been on this journey, I think you said, for the last 5 years, since you were first exposed to the idea of regenerative agriculture. How has your operation evolved in over the course of that 5 years? What pieces have you been able to bring forward and to gain some experience with? What perspectives have you gained? I know you mentioned you're now doing cover crops differently from what you have in the past. You're pruning for sap flow. You mentioned the use of sap analysis. What has the evolution looked like, or what has the development looked like over the last 5 years?
I think that the special thing at Mariah is that you're sitting on a ridge top, you're sitting on your own spring, and it's you're drinking the water that comes out of the mountain. So you really have a lot of skin in the game, actually, because whatever you put on the ground and whatever you do has a direct impact on what you put in your body through water and all the stuff. Uh, I think Mariah developed. I think plants are healthier. I think there's more life. There's more plant species that are coming up naturally. There's way less bare ground than it was before. So we have 100% ground cover now.
Bring us along on the journey. What were the steps that you took? I guess I would also ask the question of what steps would you advise other people to take in a similar or different sequence?
I think the first step that we did was learning about a holistic approach, not a reactive approach, long-term thinking, and whatever you do. That the Savory Institute was influential in that. The second step that we did was 10 short-term site on the property, 3 long-term site, to measure, to create a baseline of the property like it was. And then learning from there based on outcomes. I'm a big fan of outcomes and results. And from there, we realized that our biodiversity, for example, in the vineyard,
Could have been better.
Could have been better. So we implemented, we seeded more perennials. We
Palatable sheep stuff.
palatable sheep stuff, to bring in sheep. That was the next step, to graze, to graze and to roam. Then the next step after that was the cultivation. I think the cultivation was the biggest transition. Actually, it was a cultivation underneath the vine row.
With an undercutter.
First with a wheat with a wheat badger, then with an undercutter, and now we have 100% ground cover. What results in different challenges with how do you mow that during the season that you don't have too high grasses. And now the next step that we've so that was with the cover. Then the next step in the cover that we're working now on is low growing plants that we don't have to mow.
So yeah, I mean, for us, we normally don't have a big frost issue at our elevation. Our bud break is much later, things like that. We do have a couple swales, and lately with climate changing, we've had some frost attacks that have, caused some problems. So our only way to defend, really, we don't have sprinklers, is, we don't have frost fans. Like that isn't, so our only way to preserve our crop from frost after bud break is mowing and keeping that airflow. I mean, I guess there's things you can spray like copper and stuff like that, but that's not really what we want to do. So in that sense, we have to be mindful around our mowing, and also letting that grass grow enough that it is, doing its job, or flowering, or, fixing nitrogen, whatever we want that cover crop to be doing. So it's definitely a balancing act that we don't have it all figured out. We're learning and but this idea about, to really create a low growing, pollinator friendly, species, or different species that can be in that vine line, or in the vine row, that you may not even ever have to mow, that it never gets tall enough to get into your canopy, but it never gets tall enough to be a super big issue with airflow. I mean, that's a biological answer to some of the biggest problems in the vineyard industry. Is, I mean, vine row management is something that everybody still just like has different. I mean, that's why people strip spray, right? Like they can sit on a 4-wheeler and spray out whatever glyphosate or some chemical that they want through their vine row, instead of spending 300 or how many ever hundreds of hours tilling the ground or mowing the ground. So there's a balancing act between ground compaction, tractor time, labor costs, diesel, carbon emissions, as well as chemical inputs. That there's a better way that we can do this, and how we get there, I'm not sure, but having a plan to try to work with nature to create something that works better in our vineyard is kind of my big goal on this year, is to work on that one.
I think we overtake ourselves. I think your answer to your question is, first it was on the land that we focused on to increase it. We were driven by soil health, and that extended now to the plant. That's how SAP analysis came in. It makes sense. It makes sense to understand your soil and total nutrient digestion and all the stuff, and what the plant can take up, and where you have imbalances. And then the next step after that was, was also a moment to understand the natural vine, a perennial creeper. What does it need? How does it grow? Where are the fruitful buds? How can we prune that we actually work together with the vine, and not put it back in a system that is harmful for the plant that we try to grow?
So I want to dig into some of these pieces, but First, I want to make sure that you're aware there you may actually have a significant opportunity for frost protection with plant nutrition. We've been able to gain about 6 degrees Fahrenheit additional freeze protection above, or maybe I should say below, whatever the bud or the plant's inherent threshold is with nutrition management. So we've done this on a lot of different crops by it's a combination of increasing electrolytes and increasing the sugar content of the sap. The combination of those two things can have quite a remarkable effect.
That's
Awesome.
great. Yeah.
Yeah. So when we're thinking about cover crop species and your comments, Nicole, on managing the plants within the vine row, the last few months I haven't spoken much about Kind Harvest on the podcast, but we have this incredible online social networking platform that's at kindharvest.ag. And the single most popular discussion thread on the entire forum is vigorous, low-growing cover crops for use in orchard and vineyard systems. It has, I don't know if I'm exaggerating if I say it has hundreds of responses or not. It certainly has over 100 responses. And there's an incredible conversation from growers all over the world collaborating on and thinking about this problem and the various plant species that they're using, many of them very successfully. So that would be a resource I would definitely recommend you check out.
Great. I absolutely will.
Thanks.
So you've now made mention half a dozen times of something that is completely new to me, and that is pruning for sap flow. Tell me about pruning for sap flow. What does that mean exactly?
It's ancient. People, Europe, do it all over the place. It means that you respect the wine, that you understand that the wine is a perennial liana, that it tries to grow, that it tries to climb, that it tries to invade spaces, and that you respect the nature of the wine, meaning that how we currently cut wines creates desiccation cones, meaning that a part of the wine dies and hinders sap flow. And the new system, so every time when you make a cut, part inside dies right to dry it out. And the more cuts that you make at the same spot, the more sap flow you block actually to grow the canes and actually support the crop and all that stuff. So we did an education in specific pruning where you support controlled branching, where you leave some of the live wood, meaning 1, 2, 3-year-old wood, because that's the storage of the nutrients in the plant that actually support bud break and the growth until the first 5 leaves. So you look that
You're also accounting for the desiccation, right? With every cut, you're accounting for the space of desiccation. Like, so when you know that that's going to happen, you can make a little bit more informed pruning cuts, right? Because if you know how much space approximately it's going to desiccate back to, you can ensure that the flow still goes through to where you're wanting your vine to go. Sorry to interrupt. I just think that was part of the idea. That's how I understand it. Anyway.
Exactly. So for us, it was again the moment, right? We are trying everything with the soil to increase soil health as much as we can. We work that on sap nutrients that we can balance the wine. And also to reduce the gap between the soil and the plant available nutrients, because we have a lot of nutrients in the soil, but we don't have it in the wines at certain points. But we never thought about pruning, and that's the biggest impact that you actually have, or the biggest damage that you can create in the growth cycle of the wine. was a golden thread from the soil into the nutrients, and then
And if we're
also.
looking at sap, I mean, we're looking at our sap flow. Last year, we did our first sap analysis, and obviously compare that with our soil analysis and things like that. So we care about sap flow, like it matters. Like to think that we can prune to better encourage that flow within our vine and maintain that health and vitality of optimizing the vine health and optimizing its photosynthetic potential and back to the plant health pyramid. And this idea of that it flips a lot of things on its head, of regenerative agriculture, of soil health drives plant health. Like I really like the challenging idea of plant health drives soil health, just just the same. So, and I think looking at both sides of that, like we are trying to have a more holistic approach to our I guess our ecosystem management. It's not just about our vines, because they're just one piece of our system.
So this conversation makes so much sense to me from a first principles kind of common sense perspective, because when I think about the innovations that have been made, and here in the podcast, I've interviewed Ed Curry in the past, and I don't know if many people really realize the impact that Ed was able to make on chili peppers, but he single-handedly by himself, he deserves 100% of the credit for quadrupling the average yield of chili peppers in North America from an average of 10 tons to an average of 40 tons per acre. And how did he do that? By breeding and selecting for plants that have a very large stem diameter, so that he's able to facilitate a large volume sap flow so that the plant can sustain more fruit. And then when you transfer that to think about perennial plants, not just vines, but also trees, as you pointed out, Michael, the carbohydrates and the energy to sustain buds and new leaves is stored in the cambium layer, and in some cases, even in the heartwood, but of young wood, not of old wood, not of 10 or 20-year-old wood as the older vines are. So if I'm understanding you correctly, what you were saying is that by pruning back to one or two buds, you are actually inducing desiccation back into the old wood. You're leaving no storage or no significant storage for carbohydrates. And that is going to limit the regrowth potential of those buds that emerge the following spring. Am I thinking about that correctly?
Yes, you cut back 90% of the previous year. Yes, that's correct. And you leave one or two buds, depending on strength. You strangle the capability of the vine to push and to grow properly because there's no energy left. Yes. I think that the problem is not to cut back to one or to two buds. I think the problem is that we simplify the growth of a plant, right? So we are really focused to keep the plant in the cordon wire, always at the same spot, always really low, and we don't allow the vine to actually create some live wood. That doesn't mean that the vine grows out of the cordon. We cut it back as much as possible, that the cluster is at the same spot and that the cane grows and that it's really really nice. So I think that's the problem. And with this new method, you give the vine some space to create some live wood. You make small cuts, not big cuts, that you don't have big desiccation cones. You look where you make the cuts, that the plant can heal itself, and actually can flourish. Can flourish. It's For me, it was a really duh. It was a really
Well,
dumb
it's
one.
about respecting what the vine
Yes.
is going to try to naturally do. I mean, without, I mean, obviously you want to still create a crop from it, but having that respect, and allowing it to still do what it's naturally going to do, I think it's just understanding that gives, for me, it was like a really eye opening idea.
I, I would like to inject. It's called controlled branching. Is one of the rules. That doesn't mean that you give up control and that your wine grows out of the cordon wire and you can't farm it anymore. it is a balance of respecting the nature of the vine while working in a system that you can actually farm it efficiently.
How long have you been using this approach of pruning for sap flow, and what results have you observed?
We will do that this year the first time.
Good.
So it was
It's more the more you learn, the more you don't know, kind of thing.
exactly.
So we are learning as we go.
Well, we're learning as we go, and we will definitely let you know.
Not to say that there hasn't like our pruning methods. I mean, I don't think we are like killing. I mean, our vines are not dying, you know. So I think it's just more mindful approach to our pruning method.
And it goes back. It's complex. It's complexity. It's again right. So this approach of the pruning with nutrient balancing, with improving the land, I think that will result in a cool trajectory. It will go in the right direction. Let's see if we can get some results just from the pruning. So
Well, I think one of the points I was intending to make, but missed making regarding facilitating sap flow is there are many moments where we observe some nutrients to be low in the plant that are abundant in the soil. It's very common, for example, to observe low levels of calcium later on in the growth season or in the fruit field or berry field period. That is often associated with high heat periods. So often when we see high heat periods, we see lower calcium levels in the new growth in the sap analysis. And that is a result simply of not having generous levels of water flow, because calcium follows the water stream. And if there's not a generous amount of water flow out to the new growth tips, or if I say that a different way, if the water flow is constrained, the majority of it will be used by the old leaves before it ever gets to the new leaves, and therefore the majority of the calcium is deposited in the old leaves. And so being very intentional and very deliberate about pruning management and managing the canopy to facilitate optimal water flow and managing that just makes a lot of good sense. Where could people, if they wanted to learn more about this approach, where could people go to learn more?
there's a company that provides that.
They provide educational in
Yes.
person. It's like a combination of some online modules and an in person
Yes.
course. It's called Semenet and Search.
Semenet and Search
Is the one that we did, but there's a lot of people that, like
exactly.
Michael mentioned, it's a pruning method, but they are the ones who the class that we took.
Yes.
Yep. So just to make sure I get it correct, what is the pruning method called exactly?
It's Semenet Search is the company, and it's pruning based on sap flow.
You know, like what you're saying, you know, we last year we learned about, you know, taking, because a lot of people in the vineyard system take perennials, right? It is a little bit of a delayed response. It's completely different than the SAP analysis. The SAP analysis to me was, you know, another one of those aha, like, oh, that makes perfect sense. It's like taking a blood draw, you know, like you're understanding, you know, what are you actually uptaking? You could be eating the healthiest diet ever, and somehow you still have diabetes, or you know, like you still are deficient in iron or whatever it is. So understanding the SAP analysis around what our vines are actually able to uptake and is flowing in the sap is incredibly interesting and important for us to know and understand to balance their health better, as well as over the longer term, balance our soil and our ecosystem to provide those nutrients for our plant to then obtain them biologically. And so for me, and then learning about, you know, if we're talking about sap analysis and we need that flow to get all the way out there to help, you know, create, you know, obviously healthy, nutrient dense grapes. And then we don't prune with respecting the flow of the sap within the vine. Like it's just, you're shooting yourself in the foot kind of thing. So it all just kind of makes sense. So that's why we go down this path. So that was
we go down this
put it all
path.
together.
I would like to bring it back and say we do that because we believe that that's the best quality grapes that we can produce. So in the end, it comes back that we are a business. We are selling grapes to wineries. We produce our own wine, and all these steps of regenerative agriculture, of sap flow, of sap analyze and stuff, all, in my opinion, will result in the best and most expressive fruit that Mariah Vineyards can grow. And that's the goal.
And it's also, we want to preserve our vine health, right? Like these are deep rooted, dry farmed, many of which are well over 40 years old or 44 years old, vines that, you know, I mean, average vineyards these days in certain areas are, not even getting to 20 years and you got to rip them out. Like that is not only energy intensive, but I mean, incredibly costly. Like, so for us, these, vines in nature can live for a really long time. Exactly. So why should our vines be like, why can't we work with, you know, and they are still, I mean, Utaipa exists on some of our older vines, and we are working through how do we rechannel the sap flow around some areas that are having some dieback, and how do we do that? How do we manage this vine for its optimal health and keep it thriving and not have to, do some crazy thing like rip out, our 40-plus-year-old dry farmed vineyard, which I don't think we're anywhere near that, but it's being mindful and in our approach to respecting the health of the plant. And I heard something recently that was, a perennial will sacrifice the now for the later. And that is something that I am definitely learning with what happens, with different years, depending on climate, with our grapes. And it's an interesting thing to understand how vines work and how these plants are working their hardest to survive, not necessarily creating you know, your grapes for your wine. Like they are caring about survival. And when you can also help them care about their long-term survival, then hopefully everything works out.
They will have more energy to dedicate to the now if the future is preserved. That's the way life works. Yeah.
Mhm.
So, Michael, you've on several occasions you've mentioned your desire to focus on outcomes and producing superior quality wine. How are you measuring that, and how are you managing that, and how do you hope to see that evolve in the future?
We take soil samples. We're working with Savory Institute for their ecological outcome certification to see the improvement of our land. We have that now since several years, so we see what's happening with biodiversity. We're seeing what's happening with all the different factors that we measure. With the fruit, it's different. I think nutrient density in grapes is still on the horizon and still has to be defined properly in which direction that it goes. I listened to a podcast of Greg Pennyroyal and you that sparked me tremendously about nutrient density and secondary metabolites. How to measure that? That's a project that I'm working on, but I'm not there so far. It's more the fruit quality and the discussions with the winemaker that are buying fruit from us on one side, and then on the other side the lab tests that they provide to me, that they do during harvest, to see all the factors of the grapes.
And I mean, the plant health pyramid, helps that to me that like is a visual understanding of like just getting the basics, like let's optimize our photosynthetic potential. Like how can we better do that, right? Like optimizing like the nutrient and mineral availability to the vine to be its healthiest, then it can express itself more. It can put more energy into these phenolics and secondary metabolites that create so much of this, you know, flavors and nutrient density of plants. So I mean, that's kind of, I mean, that's where we're at, is we're trying to work up that way and optimize the health of our
And
vine to
and
make
with
high quality
tests,
fruit.
with soil tests and lab tests and chemical residue tests in our water and chemical residue tests in our wines, and just to gather as much information as possible.
And that's another thing I would say for anybody listening to this, that is farming a vineyard or whatever you are farming, and and John, you were actually the one who inspired us to check on this. Is a system is definitely, especially when you're farming organically, like you have a spray schedule to prevent mildew. It's just kind of or oftentimes you do. It's a reality of not of preventing mildew. So, we we fill our sprayer with our pond water, and we wanted to make sure that, like, for some reason, whatever we were, filling our sulfur sprayer with, um, didn't have anything bad in it. We didn't think it did, but we wanted to make sure that we weren't, foliarly like putting on some terrible thing that was causing a problem. And luckily, as we thought, our water is very clean. But just to think and be mindful about what you're putting on your ground. Like, where's your irrigation water coming from? If you're irrigating, where's the water in your sprayer coming from? Checking that water to understand if you could be, actually hindering your plant health with whatever you're applying.
I think given the mountaintop position that you described yourself in, I would also have expected your water to be quite clean. But it's very interesting. There's a surprising amount of well water, groundwater, and pond water in many agricultural regions that has a lot of pesticides in it, particularly herbicides. And it is interesting that I think kudos to you for actually going to the step of getting that tested and measured, because uh, I'm we have clearly observed that there are some sources of water that can be used for foliar spraying that can actually have a detrimental effect on the crop because of tiny trace amounts of various herbicides and other compounds that can be in that foliar water. This is something that we tend to not even think about or pay attention to.
But also in the irrigation water, right? We are in a very unique situation where we are on a mountaintop, and I mean, there's no agriculture industry anywhere near us for miles and miles and miles. Like, we don't have drift issues. We don't have. We are at the top of our watershed, so if anything, we have a responsibility not to contaminate our watershed, rather than having to worry about toxins streaming onto our land from another agriculture space. So yeah, we are in a very unique situation, compared to a lot of, neighborhood farm situations where you can be doing everything right, but yet your groundwater is contaminated, or your neighbor is spraying something that drifts onto your land. And that's an unfortunate situation. And everybody's trying to do their best to do better. But I think for us, it's really important that we continue to farm respectfully and don't bring anything onto our land.
One of the pieces we haven't yet talked about is your use of sap analysis. You mentioned you started using sap analysis a year ago, if I understood correctly. And what did you learn from your use of sap analysis, and what are you thinking differently about the future as a result of what you've learned?
We learned that there's a gap between the soil and the plant. So for example, there's a lot of iron in the soil, but there's not a lot of iron in the plant. But that's just one example. We saw that we had some imbalances with micronutrients that we put on with foliar.
Carbon to nitrogen ratio.
And then coming back to the relationships, I think carbon nitrogen ratio is off on our place too. So we have good soil health, we have good microbiome community, but carbon nitrogen ratio is actually off. So So that we have to balance it more, I guess.
And we're working on ways to do that.
Yes.
Of which obviously there's foliar applications, which in my nurse brain, I look at it as kind of like a vitamin to help the plant optimize its health potential in the moment. But the long term, the long term fix is more about how do we make sure that that the whatever we're you know deficient in the plant, what can we do to better either mine for that nutrient in our soil, or what cover crops can help enhance that nutrient or that mineral in our soil? Like, how can we better amend our soil or our system to be able to balance that long term?
Let me explain. We have the carbon nitrogen ratio is off. We have a ton of carbon and not enough nitrogen. But in the same time, we have low growing clover all over the place in our vineyard. So we should have a ton of nitrogen actually fixing. So the thoughts that we have currently is we have the legumes that could fix it. Do they actually fix nitrogen? Do we mow them too early that they can't do their job? Or what exactly do we have to change on our farming practices that the existing legumes that we have, and we have a ton of them, provide enough nitrogen to balance this ratio? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Oh my goodness, do I ever? I'm sitting here with about a dozen questions running through my mind. We could have a really fun conversation around this. When you say you have an imbalanced carbon to nitrogen ratio, I guess the first question that I'll ask is, what evidence do you have of that in the plant's performance or in the crop's performance aside from a soil test? So if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying you have excessive levels of carbon and not enough levels of nitrogen. And the first and the obvious question is your crop showing that it doesn't have enough nitrogen?
It is Haney. It is a Haney test. It's the soil, and it's not. We didn't look at it in the plants. So we looked at it in the plants, but we don't have a nitrogen deficiency in the plants.
Right. On that case, you may have I've used there's this old expression that read books and study nature. And when the plants are telling you through physiological expression that they have generous levels of nitrogen, then I would not be concerned if them don't agree. You throw away the books. And that's the case here. You read the soil analysis report. Remember, you told me earlier that you have a previous forest soil that has 12% organic matter. That is not what that soil test is calibrated for. It's like how many soils have such what could be considered luxurious levels of soil organic matter? And so I would not be concerned about the reality is that you can dig up legumes, you can look at the nodulation, you can evaluate how active those nodules are by breaking them open, looking at the internal color. Do they have a nice pink color, or are they a gray tone? So you can evaluate the efficiency of biological nitrogen fixation to a degree with that approach. But if you have, think of it another way. If you One of the things that soybeans are known for is that you cannot build organic matter by growing soybeans because, being a legume, they introduce so much nitrogen into the soil and that you can think of them almost as a carbon consumer, that they consume carbon. And so in reality, if you have a legume dominated system, then you're not really gaining soil carbon, you're not gaining organic matter very effectively. So if you have an abundance of legumes, then it makes no sense to me that your soil would be nitrogen deficient and that your crop would be nitrogen deficient. The only scenario in which I could see that possibly being the case is if your soils are deficient in cobalt or in nickel or some of the elements that are required by the rhizobium bacteria to fix nitrogen.
Well, that's exactly why we're working with the SAP analysis and soil analysis. But this idea that the calibration of, I mean, it's only as good as like the testing, right? So,
Exactly.
and yeah, that's an interesting perspective. didn't really think about. But we're learning as we go and trying to understand how we can better support the system. And maybe we don't need to support, we just need to step back. Sometimes my dad loves this saying, but sometimes the best thing to do is nothing. But I don't know necessarily know that that's this case, but we're just trying to get all the facts, or as much factual data that we can to make appropriate farming. Just make sure we maximize the potential of our vines and our overall ecosystem health. Um,
Well, I agree that sometimes the best thing to do is nothing, but that's very hard for my German spirit to hear.
Yes. Yeah, imagine. Yeah, imagine. Me too.
no, yeah.
So when you think about the journey that you are on, what is your vision for the future?
For me,
The
it's
cycle.
I'm extremely driven by nutrient density. I think that sparks me. So on one side, when I could say that the best future is that we have a pristine, clean, nature positive wine out there that is really, really nutrient dense. And I don't have the answer of all of that, how we get there. We are working on the pristine part pretty seriously. We are working on
The
the
clean
on
part.
the clean nature positive part really seriously. And the nutrient density part is something that I'm really intrigued of, and that I hope that the first two steps, the clean and the thriving nature positive approach, will actually lead into a really high in nutrients. I don't have the answer of the nutrient density part, so I know people are measuring it. I know that the Bionutrient Food Association is working on. I know that several people are working on this field. I know that it's a black hole and that it has to be defined first. But for me, it would be beautiful if we could measure that and compare that with other vineyards.
We've just recently launched a regenerative agriculture verification standard that we're calling Integrity Grown. And we choose the word integrity very deliberately, very consciously. There's many layers of meaning wrapped up in that word choice. But one of the reasons, one of the motives for it is that I've for the last several years, I have been deliberately choosing to not use the word nutrient density, because nutrient density means so many different things to so many different crops. We can talk about phytonutrient concentrations, we could talk about mineral concentrations. Instead, I've been choosing to use the phrase nutritional integrity and microbiome integrity, because when I think about nutritional integrity and what does that really mean, from a very practical um, in-field perspective, nutritional integrity and microbiome integrity would mean to me a plant that has such a robust immune function and that is so resilient to climatic stress and so resilient to pathogens that you no longer need to spray for powdery mildew, and that you no longer need to constantly be worried about a variety of different disease and insect pests, because you have this robust immune system that is supported by nutritional integrity and microbiome integrity. And so there's this element of, when we think about verifying quality and what quality means, I agree that we still need to define exactly what that is. What does that look like? And I would propose that the way we should think about is it is those plants which demonstrate true resilience, which demonstrate disease and insect resistance, while at the same time producing very good yields. Those are the plants that we should look to as an example for this is what quality should look like. And I expect that once, as we identify what this looks like on different crops, my suspicion is that may not look like extremely high levels of all nutrients. Instead, I expect it will look like a balance of nutrients. So it's not about a nutrient density in terms of mineral density as much as it is nutritional balance.
Love it. Absolutely love every word that you said.
That is, yeah, that's
Lots for us to figure out.
Yes,
yeah.
it's going to be also interesting to see the integrity of the nutrients from a grape through the fermentation process into a wine. You know, it's in the industry where I am in the wine industry, because it's always the product at the end, right? So I'm really intrigued to learn more about that too.
And currently,
That's a fermentation is a very powerful bioassay. It's one of the pieces that Greg Pennyroyal points out, is that as they have developed nutritional integrity in their wine grapes, the fermentation curve has become so smooth, and this perfect curve.
no, I'm excited to see where
Yeah.
where this goes in all sorts of crops.
I think it would be also a really powerful argument for regenerative agriculture, when we can relate it to nutrient integrity, like you mean it, or balanced fruit.
Well, we all we believe, we hypothesize, we hope and expect that will translate to the immune function, that nutritional integrity in the food we eat also translates to nutritional and microbiome integrity for ourselves as well, and for our livestock, and for all the various organisms in the supply chain that we care about.
We discussed a lot about that. Especially Nicole is an ER nurse, so she comes from the health side, and brings health and farming together. So that's we discussed a lot about that, about nutritional integrity, and
I mean, our food
you
system is
eat
making people sick.
and you
killing
eat
us.
what you absorb. So
You are what you absorb, not
yes,
what you eat, kind of
exactly.
thing. So, yeah, no, I definitely have as a sore point, or I guess a sticking point with me, is human health and soil health, or plant health, and the health of our ecosystem is
Exactly.
completely interconnected, and we are so disconnected from it, but we are dying because of it. Um, and it's, part of me, I mean, the emergency room, we patch you up and kick you right back out. I mean, on a very low level, it's not a preventative medicine space. But I feel like being part of this, regenerative agriculture, or whatever, nature positive type of farming system, even if it is grapes that create wine, which is an alcohol, I still feel like I can do more healing good work through farming than I often do on a daily basis in a broken healthcare system of that I work within. But I still love it, and I still do. I mean, we still do a lot of really good work. The emergency room is very, very, very necessary on many levels. So, but that's a completely other can of worms that we won't open. But I am very passionate about how farming is very, very interconnected to our human health.
Thank you, Nicole, for bringing that forward. I spent less time today speaking about the detrimental impacts that our agriculture and food system is having, because, and on some level, I find it to not be a productive or useful conversation, in that talking about all the bad things that are happening doesn't inspire very many people to change. And so I'd much rather talk about the possibilities and the opportunities and the potential that exists. But one of the things that I've described in the past is that as farmers, we have the capacity, the opportunity to have more of an impact on public health than almost any other sector, with the possible exception of food processing, because we have the capacity to grow food that contributes the ability to prevent people from becoming ill. And that is something that our current, our mainstream contemporary medicine model does not have the ability to do. They cannot prevent people from becoming ill.
And that's exactly why I'm so intrigued with farming. I mean, I feel like I can be a better healer as, in the farming space than I can at this moment in our healthcare space. I don't get me wrong. I value being a nurse. But there's so much good that can be done in the farming space. Farmers are not just stewards of the land; they're healers of the land. They're healers. We can do better. We can farm better, and farmers, as you say, are incredibly integral to public health and well-being, and decreasing morbidity and mortality in our populations.
And we can be proactive and not reactive. If emergency room is reactive, and when you farm, you're proactive that you don't get there. So
that is such a wonderful note to conclude this conversation on. I want to say thank you to both of you for being here, for sharing your story, your pathway, the things that you've been learning. And I wish you all success and look forward to continue working with you on your operation in the future. Thank you for being here.
And thank you very much for having us.
The team at AEA and I are dedicated to bringing this show to you because we believe that knowledge and information is the foundation of successful regenerative systems. At AEA, we believe that growing better quality food and making more money from your crops is possible. And since 2006, we've worked with leading professional growers to help them do just that. At AEA, we don't guess, we test, we analyze, and we provide recommendations based on scientific data, knowledge, and experience. We've developed products that are uniquely positioned to help growers make more money with regenerative agriculture. If you are a professional grower who believes in testing instead of guessing, someone who believes in a better, more regenerative way to grow, visit advancingecoag.com and contact us to see if AEA is right for you. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to working with you.